morning. We're going to play some songs together. Feel free to sing along. Lord God, we know that you won't relent. You'll never stop pursuing us, God. These hearts are broken and they're a mess sometimes. Right now, some of us are just full of fear and panic, but God, you got us and you love us. Thank you, Father. Thank you that you always pursue us. You never give up. There is power in the name of Jesus. There is power in the name of Jesus to break every chain, break every chain, break every chain. There is power in the name of Jesus. There is power in the name of Jesus. There is power in the name of Jesus to break every chain, 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 break every chain. All sufficient sacrifice. So freely given, such a price for our redemption. Heaven's gates swing wide. There's an army rising up. There's an army rising up. There's an army rising up to break every chain, 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 break every chain. There's power in the name of Jesus. There is power in the name of Jesus. There is power in the name of Jesus to break every chain, 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 break every chain. No place I'd rather be. No place I'd rather be. No place I'd rather be than here in your love, here in your love. No place I would rather be. No place I'd rather be. No place I'd rather be than here in your love. Set a fire down in my soul that I can't contain, I can't control. I want more of you, God. I want more of you, God. Set a fire down in my soul that I can't contain, I can't control. I want more of you, God. I want more. 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 I I want more of you, God. Set a fire down in my soul that I can't contain, that I can't control. I want more of you, God. I want more of you, God. Set a fire down in my soul that I can't contain and I can't control. I want more of you, God. We love you. We'll never stop. All this is for you, Jesus. We love you, and we can't get enough. All this is for you, Jesus. We love you. We'll never stop. Can't live without you, are so good to us. Even when times are hard and we're trapped at home and we can't be together, we're all together in your name, Lord. Thank you for loving us so much. Praise his name forevermore. For endless days we will sing your praise, oh Lord our God.
Hey, good morning, Christian Fellowship Church. It is great to see myself in the camera again. It's great to see you all out there, and hopefully you're worshiping, and really appreciate John leading us in some tunes this morning. And we're going to pause for just a moment, and what I'm going to request that you do is the next best thing that we have in the 2020 quarantine is that you would send a quick text message, or you could even call or do a quick Marco Polo video. I know that's what some of the kids are doing these days, or whatever you believe is a good way to connect with people. And I've got a timer here on my phone, and I am going to time out 1 minute, and then then I'll bring you back. So send a message, an emoticon, a GIF, whatever you want to send to people. Just send someone or a couple people a quick greeting. Let them know you're thinking about them. Maybe it's somebody you haven't chatted with since we've been meeting online, meeting virtually, and just a good way to remind people that you care about them and that you are thinking about them as we are worshiping together this morning. So you have 1 minute, go. That's 30 seconds. You could send at least 3 more text messages. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we're back. Good. All right, so if you're like me, you have found yourself at times thinking, these people must have completely missed the point. Or perhaps it was something you did, and you looked back at your previous behavior and you thought, oh man, I really missed the point. And we are going to be looking at one of those here this morning. And first, we're going to be looking at what I believe is a false seventh sign in the 7 signs of new creation, the book of John. And so really quickly, we're going to recap our first 6 signs. And I actually have some slides this morning. So could we go ahead and pull up that first slide? Yeah, there we go. So the first sign was when Jesus turned water into wine. And we saw how there were these 6 stone jars, and these 6 stone jars were kind of used for ceremonial cleaning. And Jesus took a seventh jar, and he used that to turn 6 jars into wine. He turned it from water into wine, and so this was kind of his coming out party in the book of John. This was him kind of showing everyone that he was there to do ministry and that he's ready to put his name out in the world and let people know what he's doing. And so this was the first sign of new creation in the Gospel of John. And it's this sign of abundance. It's a sign that God cares even about things like weddings and weddings being spoiled, that God deeply is concerned with even our deepest embarrassments and frustrations and hurts. So the first sign it's a surprising one if we were looking for a God to come and create all things new, but the first one is that he turned water into wine. The second sign, could we pull that slide up? Yeah, the second sign was when Jesus healed an official's son, and if you remember, Roger came and we used to do this thing where we would all sit in one big room and somebody would stand on stage and talk to us. It was a sign of a different time, right? And if you remember, Roger came and brought a good sermon about this, and basically as Jesus was continuing to take down the boundaries that the Israelites had made around their own people. And so he was showing that God wanted to reach beyond their boundaries of who they thought was in and who they thought was out. And Jesus was extending grace even to this royal official son. So that was the second sign of new creation. Next slide. And then the third sign of new creation was when Jesus came to this pool, and there were all these crippled people around this pool, these people with different physical issues. And this guy that couldn't walk, Jesus came to him, if you remember, and he said, "Do you want to walk?" And the guy thought, this guy is a genius. He knows what I want the most in life, right? And it's such an amazing miracle because Jesus comes on the Sabbath and he heals this man. And so Jesus is kind of showing the Pharisees and the people of Israel that their old ideas of obedience and following God, their old ideas of what was righteous and what was not righteous, he was showing them that they didn't quite understand what those things meant. After that, we came around to the fourth sign, and the fourth sign was kind of a dual sign, if you remember. It was when Jesus was out on the hillside with his followers, and they saw these giant crowds that were following him, and Jesus said to his followers, he said, "Hey, we might need to feed these guys and these women and these children." And if you remember, one of the disciples said, "Well, how are you going to pay for that, Jesus? Do you ever think about that?" And then another disciple who, if we were there, we would have thought this guy doesn't know anything. He brought a child, and he said, "Hey, this kid's got 5 loaves and 2 fish, and we only have 8,000-9,000 people to feed. Surely this is a start, right?" And I think about that one a lot, and I think, what a beautiful display of faith, and that he knew Jesus could take whatever he gives to him, and he could turn it into enough. And so we saw how Jesus multiplied the loaves and the fish, and then the second part of this particular sign, Jesus walked on the water out to his followers, and this was kind of the self-revelation of this sign, and that Jesus is walking out to him, and he says, "Ego eimi," which is, if you remember, it means I am. And so it's this clear allusion by Jesus to the fact that he considers himself equal to the Father. This is language that God the Father would have used throughout the Old Testament to identify himself, specifically with Moses, and other places he would say, "I am" is his name. And so Jesus is drawing on that, and he's walking across this chaos, this stormy sea, and it shows that no matter what's going on in our world, no matter where we are, how lost we feel, Jesus has the power to overcome that. Sign number 5, Dave Hampson brought our first virtual sermon about sign number 5, and this was the healing of the man born blind. And if you remember, Jesus says it was not he sinned or his parents sinned, and it should give us a reevaluation of our ideas of who gets sick and who gets hurt and who doesn't, and that it's not based on righteousness or goodness, that sometimes terrible things happen to the most pious of people. And so it's not about whether the man sinned or not, but it was an opportunity for God to do an amazing thing. The sixth sign last week, Jesus ignored his friend's call for help. He ignored Mary and he ignored Martha. He ignored that his friend Lazarus, the one he loved, was sick, and he took his sweet time getting over to him, and Lazarus died. And if you remember, there's this moment of complaint, right, by Mary and Martha, and they're basically saying, Jesus, if you'd been here, this wouldn't have happened. And Jesus didn't cast aspersions on them. He didn't yell at them. He didn't say, how dare you question me? He wept. And so we have this amazing Jesus who weeps whenever the people he cares about suffer. And I think that means so much to us today. And so those are our first six signs. And today we're coming to what some probably viewed as the seventh sign in this 7 signs of new creation. But I would argue that it's a false sign. So if you want to turn with me to John chapter 12, we're going to be starting in verse 12 here. And we read this text way back at the beginning before we started the 7 signs of new creation as a way to kind of frame Jesus' entire ministry. And in fact, this is where it all starts to kind of come together, I think, in what he's doing and why he's doing it a certain way. So starting in verse 12, the next day, the great crowd that had come for the festival heard that Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. They took palm branches and went out to meet him, shouting, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the King of Israel. And the palm branches would have been symbolic of the Maccabees, who had fought back the Seleucid Empire not too long before this, a couple hundred years before this, and they had retaken Jerusalem. They had reestablished Judah as its own nation. And so when the people brought palm branches out, they were basically saying without saying, hey, we are ready for this revolution. We're ready for what Jesus is going to do. Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it. As it is written, do not be afraid, daughter Zion. See, your king is coming, seated on a donkey's colt. At first, his disciples did not understand all this. Only after Jesus was glorified did they realize that these things had been written about him, that these things had been done to him. Now the crowd that was with him when he called Lazarus from the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to spread the word. Many people, because they had heard that he had performed this sign, went out to meet him. So the Pharisees said to one another, see, this is getting us nowhere. Look how the whole world has gone after him. Now, if this story of Jesus was unfolding the way that we think stories ought to unfold, the way we would normally write stories, this is the moment Jesus has been building towards, right? He's slowly and surely, he has done all these little things that would indicate to people he's going to be the most magnificent king. And so this would be the moment that he came and seized the throne. This would be the moment that he led the people in revolt, that they defeated the Romans, that they knocked them out of their nation. They established themselves as the winners, the champions, the ones who had finally and completely returned from exile. And this would have been very similar to what had happened with the Maccabees, right? And if you remember, we talked a little bit about this last year, and normally I love talking about the Maccabees on Palm Sunday. This year, we're going to be talking about the 7th sign on Palm Sunday, so we had to move the Maccabees a little bit earlier, but the Maccabees were this family who had led the people of Judah, the people of Israel, in this successful revolt. And so anytime there was somebody who seemed to be a king, seemed to be a Messiah, the people expected the same thing. And, you know, if this was happening today, and if Jesus was becoming king or, president, we would expect him to march right into Washington, D.C., right? And he would make everything right. He would make everybody finally do what they were supposed to do. And he would make people stop bickering, and he would make them stop arguing. And suddenly he would bring justice and righteousness and goodness, and he would set all things right. And so the question is, if this is the seventh sign, then did Jesus do that? Is that immediately what he started to do? So Jesus, after this triumphal entry, he comes in and basically predicts his death to his followers. And that's not a great campaign slogan, you know. I don't know if you've seen. Apparently, there's an election of some sort that's going to be happening later this year, but soon there are going to be signs popping up in yards, and people will be telling other people about just how righteous and justice will finally be restored if we just vote a certain way. And what's interesting is I don't think any of these campaign signs will have, hey, vote for this guy for president. He's going to die. And so Jesus has these crowds following him into Jerusalem, and then he comes to his followers and he says, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna be killed soon," and that's not a really successful way to do a campaign. So he does that, and then we see there's belief and unbelief between the Jews, and we see all these other things happening, and so then we get to the next kind of intimate story, and this is a revelation of Jesus to his followers. So this is, again, not the seventh sign. We're going to be talking about that next week, but if you want to turn with me, it's just one chapter over. Next slide. John chapter 13. And this is one of those moments that I think Jesus, we talk and we think a lot about the transfiguration, the story that happens in Luke and Matthew. And we talk and think a lot about that. This is this moment where the godness of Jesus seems to be pulled back and revealed. And I wonder a little bit, maybe this story we're about to look at is actually really the raw glory of Jesus exposed to his followers. Maybe this is the moment where it's really, this curtain is really pulled back, and we really see the truth of who Jesus was. So, John chapter 13. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and to go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And this phrase, "to the end," is eis telos, if you can read that in Greek, and so it's translated "to the end" a lot of times, but really it could mean to the fullness. It really probably ought to mean to the fullness, and this is a phrase that happens a lot, and it doesn't mean just to the punctual end of something, but it means to the very, like the end of the line type of thing. This is like the definition of loving them. So he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer garment, and wrapped a towel around his waist. And the word "took off" here is the word tithemi, and it means lay aside. And so it's not just taking off, it's about laying aside. And Jesus uses this term throughout when he's talking about laying down his life, putting aside, removing his life. It's in chapter 10, verse 15, 17 and 18, chapter 10, verse 11, chapter 13, 37, 15, 13. Jesus uses this a lot. And so this is a clear allusion to those other places of Jesus is setting aside what he could grasp as his own, and instead he's embracing and serving the people who follow him. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Now, this is a common thing that happened in the ancient Near East, and maybe still occurs today. I don't know. I haven't been over there. So this happened a lot. And so before a meal, either the host or more often a servant would come and wash everyone's feet. And they would do this for any of three main reasons. First, this was a personal hygiene. I mean, feet stank, and especially people that are walking around in hot deserts and they have sand all over them. And I mean, it's gross. And so they would wash their feet, and they kind of reclined at tables in a different way than we do. And so this would have been a way to kind of get the stink away, right? And so they did it for that. Sometimes this was an act just of pure hospitality, of saying, hey, you are welcome into our home, and we want to love you well and make you comfortable. And sometimes this would be kind of a cultic act or an act of worship in some way. And the likelihood here is that this is simply an act of hospitality and hygiene mixed together. It is interesting the time that he does this. So this is in the middle of the meal. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Jesus replied, you do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you will understand. No, said Peter, you shall never wash my feet. Jesus answered, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. Then, Lord, Simon Peter replied, not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well. Jesus answered, those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body's clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you. For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said not everyone was clean. When he finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. Do you understand what I have done for you? He asked. You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly, I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. Turn over to verse 31. And it talks about Judas betraying Jesus, and we don't have time to really kind of get into that part of the story right now. So when Judas was gone, Jesus said, now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will glorify the Son in himself, and will glorify him at once. My children, I will be with you only a little longer. You will look for me, just as I told the Jews, so I now tell you, where I'm going you cannot come. A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. Simon Peter asked him, Lord, where are you going? Jesus replied, where I am going you cannot now follow, but you will follow later. Peter asked, Lord, why can't I follow you now? I will lay down my life for you. Then Jesus answered, will you really lay down your life for me? Very truly, I tell you, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. So I wanted to include Peter's betrayal because I think it's an important bookend when we talk about the triumphal entry. We talk about Peter saying, no, you can't. Why don't you wash my whole body? I think it's an important part of recognizing who Peter was in his development. And we're going to talk a little bit about Peter here in a few weeks. But the question is, what is going on in this story? And one of the questions we've been encouraging to ask is, what does this reveal about Yahweh? What does this reveal about Jesus? Or what does it reveal about Jesus as equal to Yahweh? And I want to take you back to a term that we've been discussing throughout here. It's this idea of progressive revelation. So progressive revelation says that basically throughout the Bible, the journey from the Old Testament into the New, God is revealing things about himself. And those things are certainly true, but they're not complete. And so what we have in Jesus is the complete and the full revelation of God. And so we see this in the beginning of John when he says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then we see over in Colossians, Paul's talking, and he says, for in Christ all the fullness of the deity lives in bodily form. We see over in Hebrews chapter 1, it talks about this as well. And so one of the things I want to encourage you is this idea of progressive revelation. It goes throughout God revealing himself in the Old Testament, and it comes to Jesus Christ. And one of the temptations I think that we have, or we get a little bit mixed up, is that we start to think that Bible is the end point of that revelation. We start to think that the Bible is the fullness of the revelation of God. And the Bible certainly is what God uses to point us to that fullness, but the Bible has only ever been about revealing Jesus and revealing Christ to us clearly and certainly. And so we should be careful not to make a mistake that a lot of people make, and that is that they know the Bible very well, but they don't seem to know Jesus. This was the mistake the Pharisees made. They knew the Old Testament really well, but they missed Jesus when they came into contact with him. This is a mistake people make even today. It's a mistake we see the evil one tempting Jesus out in the wilderness, and the evil one knows his Bible, right? But he doesn't know Jesus. And so while we believe that the Bible is true, while we believe that the Bible points towards Jesus, sometimes I think we lose that. This is about Jesus. It's not about the Bible. And so the Bible is meant to be a tool that points us towards and takes us to Jesus. The Bible is the record of God revealing himself, and Jesus is the revelation, and the Bible is pointing to him. And so it's an important distinction I think we have to get, because I've known a lot of people that know the Bible and they don't know Jesus. And I've known some people that know Jesus and they don't know their Bible so well. And so, yeah, ideally you'd know both. But I want to encourage you, just knowing the Bible doesn't mean you know Jesus. You've got to know Jesus. And so Jesus is revealed here, and progressive revelation slowly and surely starts to show who God really is, and progressive revelation, to me, reveals to us that we should have the Bible always subordinate to who Jesus is, and that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And so progressive revelation takes us to this point, and we see throughout Paul, we see in John, Jesus is God. Jesus is revealed to be equal to God. And so when we see Jesus, we see the fullness of God. And what does the washing of the feet, kind of juxtaposed with the triumphal entry, reveal to us about God? What does it show us about this God? To me, this story reveals a humble God. See, if we were writing a story about God and we were trying to make up a more fantastic God than anybody's ever made up, we would certainly come up with this idea of the triumphal entry. We would definitely come up with an idea like that. But if we were trying to tell a story about amazing love, about a God who created everything, that created human beings, man and woman, and that he loves human beings more than anything, I don't think any of us would come up with the idea that this God would wash feet. It is crazy. But this is the story we have, and this is the Jesus we have revealed, and that is that he washes the feet of those he loves. This is what is revealed about God, that this is a humble God who washes feet. The next question is, what does this story reveal to us about the new creation? To me, it reveals the deep certainty that the only way we participate in new creation is by the grace of Jesus Christ. And this is a truth that a lot of times we think we know, but we still think that our behavior has allowed us to have our feet washed, right? But I want to remind you, the one who betrayed Jesus, he was having his feet washed too. He sat there with them and he had his feet washed. And so what this is a recognition that Jesus is the host of this new creation, and that Jesus invites us in based on no merit of our own, based on no exercise of our own, based on no moral holiness of our own. This is based purely on the fact that he loves and he loves us. And so this foot washing didn't happen for Peter because he had earned it, right? It didn't happen because he had done well enough. It should be deeply uncomfortable to us because this is grace. This is strange, right? And so one of the things I was reflecting on is that nearly all faiths in this world are centered around and based on what we can do for the deity. So what can we do for God? What can we do to appease God? What can we do to make God happy? What can we do to make God's life better? How can we how can we bring a sacrifice to God? But here, the question is really, what can God do for you? What can Jesus do for you? And so Jesus is making the point that he will wash feet. That's what he will do for you. He will serve you. So after we've asked ourselves, what does this reveal about God? What does this reveal about new creation? Next, we ask ourselves, what does this passage mean to us? The first part is that to be part of Jesus' kingdom means that we let him wash us. He lets us in. He hosts us at the table. Now, one of the temptations, I think, is to make this about baptism, because water is used, because washing is used, and it's not about baptism. But the foot washing and baptism are about the same event. They are about the same thing, and that is that Jesus, by his grace and by his blood, has invited us into his kingdom. Our job is to accept that. And so this wasn't a prefiguring of baptism or anything like that. This isn't a theology of baptism. This is just a pure demonstration of the fact that Jesus is inviting us in and that he's making us clean. Second thing that I think this means to us is that to love is to serve. I don't see any way around this. I'm sorry. If somebody claims to love someone but they will not serve them, then I think that they are not being honest. And that's a hard truth, isn't it? But Jesus says at the end of this, if the world will know you by the way you love one another. And to me, that means we have to serve one another. And I was thinking about this, and we are blessed. I'm actually going to name a name here in a minute, but we're blessed with a service-oriented elder team here at CFC. And one of those, I was trying to think of what's an analogy for washing feet in the 21st century. And one of the things I would encourage you with, sometimes we think that because Jesus washed feet that it has to be about washing feet, but washing feet was the custom at the time, and so we can adapt it to customs of the 21st century, and we can ask ourselves, what would washing feet look like today? In my opinion, one of the ways that it looks is by washing dishes for others. And so I was thinking about this, and I thought, there is a member of our elder team who, anytime there are dishes that need to be washed, I find him at the kitchen sink, and that's Dan Roars, and I wanted to give him a shout out by name, because I know he doesn't do that to get a shout out by name, but to me it's something I admire. And I always think if you want to know who's really a leader by Jesus' definition, you look for somebody that would wash dishes. And I say that knowing that our entire elder and welder team, all of our leadership, they all look to serve, but that is a very specific way. And I'll tell you, I hate doing dishes too. So it's always relieving to me to find Dan doing them. So what that means is that to love is to serve, and to serve is to love. And then the last thing is that we are also invited to this washing. Jesus didn't stop washing feet whenever he washed the disciples' feet. We're all invited to that same table, and we're all invited to that same spot. And so he offers us the same hospitality. He offers us the same seat at the table. And I think that's the beauty of this new creation, is that this table, Jesus didn't look and say, okay, who's deserving to be at the table? He didn't look and he didn't say, who's going to be the best representative followers of me? Who's going to just really do this the best? Jesus said, who will let me wash their feet? And we will keep building our table as large as it needs to be for all those people to sit. And Jesus offers this foot washing to any and to all who would take it. And I would encourage you to take it if you haven't. So normally today we did this once, but we're trying to do communion once a month now, and that's strange because we're not all together. But I want to close out today by encouraging you. There are a couple different passages people use for communion. Look them up. Put put your thumb there, and then go grab some bread or some crackers, grab some juice or some wine, grab whatever you want, because you're at home and you kind of have to be, right? But go grab something. And I would encourage you to read that with your family. Have a little communion. If you're by yourself, have communion by yourself. Meditate by yourself. Reflect on the fact that Jesus wanted to wash your feet even. What a humble God. Take communion and then eat lunch or eat dinner together and remind one another of the goodness of Jesus Christ. He made a way for us to sit at the table, and none of us earned our spot. And it's such an amazing grace. So, hey, thanks for being here with us this morning, CFC. And I know that this is a tumultuous time, but I want to encourage you. God's not done working among us, and he's not done working in our world, and we're going to come back and we'll be together, hopefully sooner rather than later, but we want to make sure that we're honoring the people that would be vulnerable to this thing. And so we will be together, and we trust in the goodness of God that he will carry us through the hardships in the meantime. So reach out to one another, send some texts, send some emails, send some voice messages, send some Marco Polos, whatever it is. Send out greetings, be in touch with each other. We love you. We'll talk to you soon.